Hi, Anthony. Welcome to PDAF, the 8th edition. Today we'll be speaking more about your book and your work, the Palestine Laboratory, and we're going to be speaking more about the Gaza Laboratory, like how battle-tested AI has become a threat to the world. Anthony is the author of the Palestine Laboratory, How Israel Exports the Technology of the Occupation Around the World. He's a foremost expert on how Israel uses technological advancements to further occupation in Palestinian territories. Of course, the relevance of your work is couldn't be underestimated at this point in time when we're seeing how technologies are being used in the genocidal violence, the war that's ongoing in Gaza. So we'll be speaking more about those topics. My first question to you is so your book highlights how Israel transformed the subjugation and domination of Palestinians into an asset, how they're using the plight of Palestinians as a signature selling point. You use the term the Palestine Laboratory to describe this phenomenon, where an occupied nation serves as a workshop for developing and refining methods of domination. Can you tell us more on how Israel's utilization of technology, particularly AI-assisted technologies in war, examples like the Lavender, Gospel, Where's Your Daddy, and of course in the occupation, facial recognition technologies, has facilitated this transformation? What implications does it have for both Palestinians and international community?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here because as an organization, I've followed your organization's work for a long time. In fact, I quote some of the organization's research in my book, The Palestine Laboratory, so I'm rapt to be here, if only virtually. Wish I could be there with you. There's no doubt that the danger for the world of the laboratory is not just for Palestinians, not for a second minimizing what is happening to Palestinians, of course, in Palestine and in Gaza at the moment. We have to obviously center them, rightly so. But as I show in the book, there are many, many nations that look to what Israel's doing long before October 7 and certainly since October 7 with admiration. Even some nations that are critical of what Israel's doing in Gaza because they want a piece of surveillance technology, repressive technology, weapons, whatever it may be. And one of the reasons I guess I wrote the book, which took obviously years of research, and I was living in Palestine for a long time in East Jerusalem. I spent time in the West Bank and Gaza, and obviously Israel itself, and elsewhere around the world. It came out last year, was the fact that I was seeing more and more evidence of what is happening to Palestinians globally, that I almost call it the Palestinianization of conflict. And I estimate in the book, because no one actually knows the exact number of how many countries Israel has sold this repressive technology and weapons to, anywhere between 125 and 145 in the last half century, which is an insane number of countries, democracies, dictatorships. If you think of any repressive state in the last 50 years, 60 years, 70 years, it is very well known often that the US will back that state. What is far less known that Israel has done almost exactly the same thing. Now, obviously, on one level, the US is a superpower. Israel is a superpower to an extent, but obviously America is still the major superpower in the world. That's not going to change anytime soon. Although it's often unclear since October 7 who exactly is a superpower, who's actually in charge here. Is it the US or is it Israel? But ultimately, it's pretty clear that Biden has made a decision because of his history, because of his age, because of the Holocaust. God knows all the real reasons that goes on in his head, that Israel should be supported 110%. And the Israeli response in Gaza to October 7, on the one hand, has shocked me because of the extremism, the brutality, the high death toll, but also has not, because I very much see what's happening in Gaza now, really, and obviously I say this as someone who is, I'm not religious, but I'm Jewish. I'm a secular, non-religious Jew. And I very much see what's happening now as a continuation of 1948. In fact, in many ways, I think it's uncontroversial to say what's happening now in 2023 and 24 is in fact worse than 48. The death toll is much higher, way higher. The displacement is way higher. The use of repressive technology, killer drones, artificial intelligence, obviously none of that existed in 1948. I think we are on a whole different paradigm here to what happened. Now, none of that's to obviously minimize the horrific events in 1948, of course, which we're still, particularly Palestinians, living with, managing, dealing with. But what's happening now is frankly on a bigger scale. And the idea that there are many states looking at what Israel is doing in Gaza with admiration and saying, we want to get a taste of what, not just what Israel is using, but we want to buy those AI tools, those drones. And you will see in the coming 6, 12 months and beyond, a number of states, because Israel is already, there's been 2 major arms fairs globally since October 7, late last year in Paris, a few months ago in Singapore, in my part of the world here in Asia. And at both those places, there were huge Israeli installations, both Israeli government and also Israeli defense companies, many of whom operating in Gaza in the last 7 months, talking openly about these tools, weapons have been battle tested in Gaza. And there's a willing market for that. So we need to be aware of that, fight back against that. And frankly, the only way this is going to end is arms embargoes imposed by states on Israel.
Yeah, you point to a very important matter here, arms embargo, and the fact that those technologies are being sold internationally. So we have recent reports that say that Israeli startups are exporting advanced military tech powered by artificial intelligence, which they're saying is like battle-tested AI systems during the war on Gaza. How do you perceive the use of AI-driven military technologies in situations like the one in Gaza? What ethical considerations should be taken into account regarding their development, export, potential proliferation to other regions or conflict zones? What action should the international community be taking towards Israeli startup techs?
So Israel has clearly been using artificial intelligence extensively since October 7 in Gaza. They've been using it before in Gaza in the wars in 2014 and 2021. It's not the first time it's been used, but it's on a much bigger scale. And before I go any further, it's worth saying that I think some of the media coverage in the last months has slightly misunderstood the focus. That yes, AI is a danger, and I'll explain why in a minute, to be sure. But if AI didn't exist, Israel would still have found many ways to slaughter huge amounts of people. It doesn't require AI to do so. In other words, Israel has been fighting the Palestinians for decades, long before AI was even a possibility. That didn't stop them killing tens of thousands in Lebanon or the West Bank or Gaza, etc. But having said all that, there's no doubt that what Israel has been using is essentially a way to far more quickly find so-called targets. And this targeting has been gained from Israeli drones, US intelligence, US intelligence gathering both off the coast of Israel, Palestine, but also many listeners and viewers might not be aware of this, but one of the biggest US intelligence bases actually is in the center of my country, Australia. It's called Pine Gap. And was built in the 70s, and it is one of the key intelligence gathering bases for the US globally. It might seem bizarre to have on the other side of the world from where you're living in Palestine, but that's the reality. It was used extensively in the US wars in Iraq and Afghanistan to gather intelligence. And I have evidence that the US has been gathering evidence through that military base, intelligence base, and passing it to Israel for so-called targeting. Obviously, we don't have all the details of how Israel so-called targets terrorists, so they claim terrorists. But it's pretty clear that mass killing is the point. This idea that we are often sold, right, that, well, AI is going to make war cleaner, it's the complete nonsense. The opposite is happening. The point is mass killing. The point is to kill. I don't think Israel aims to kill 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza, but the point is to kill huge amounts of people and to make Gaza unlivable. And that's frankly what has happened. So the use of AI tools where, according to media reports and people I've also spoken to, that a target is thrown up and a human being will be given maybe 20 seconds to make a decision to press the button or not. Now, apart from the fact that in 20 seconds you can't decide much of anything, where is that information coming from? What are we judging that on? And clearly we can see, even in the last 24 hours, this week, there was a US intelligence report. Now, we treat everything the US says with a grain of salt, but let's say it's true. They claim that 35% of Hamas militants had been killed by Israel since October 7. Now, I'm not very good at maths, but that would suggest that the majority are still alive, still fighting, still going above ground, below ground, who knows? Now, the idea that AI has in any way assisted in killing 40,000 at least Palestinians in Gaza, the majority of whom are civilians, men, women, and children, although far too many of everyone, but particularly women and children, and obviously men. But the idea that Israel has only killed a relatively small amount of Hamas fighters speaks volumes about the kind of war that they're fighting. AI is simply the latest tool that's being used as a crutch, you could say, for its war making. And it's allowed Israel to define an enemy so broadly. So if someone, for example, has a conversation with a Hamas member, and as we know, people will know that know this fact watching this in Palestine, maybe globally, Hamas, for better or worse, has run Gaza for years. That's the reality. So the fact that not everyone in Hamas is carrying a gun, the fact the majority of people in Hamas do not carry guns, they are working in bureaucracies or in various ministries. Of course, there are some Hamas fighters too. That's obviously the fact. So the idea that anyone who has any association with Hamas, which is huge amounts of people in Gaza, is apparently legitimately targeted, so Israel claims. And of course, the fear is finally that Israel has, as other states do that use AI, is that there'll be regulation. There is currently zero regulation about the use of AI. There's zero regulation of any kind of these methods of war. And of course, most of these major states have no interest in imposing regulation. So AI has been a big factor in Israel's war, but so is brute, ugly bombing and soldiers running riot. It's pretty obvious.
Indeed, that's a very bleak, a picture of what's going on, but it's also very accurate, and it's scary, and it really pushes us to think more of, okay, with all this killing and all this suffering that's assisted by technologies in a way that we don't even understand as of yet. What steps, how can we address this exploitation of those technologies, and what steps can we, as civil society organizations, activist communities, even governments, what steps can they take to stop perpetuating the suffering due to technologies in this region?
You mean particularly in Gaza or just in general?
Particularly in Gaza and in the rest of Palestine as well. Of course,
pretty
in a context where what starts in Palestine finds its way elsewhere.
Indeed. Look, one of the key points, as I just said, is that there needs to be massive pressure on our own institutions and governments to impose some kind of regulation. And regulation doesn't solve everything. For example, there's no regulation on spyware. Spyware is ubiquitous. Pegasus and other tools. Israel, of course, are global pioneers in this, as other nations are too, but particularly Israel. There's been a form of spyware for around 15 or so years. There's no regulation. Literally zero. So spyware, unsurprisingly, is ubiquitous around the world in countless countries, democracies and dictatorships. Not just pushed by Israel, but Israel is probably the first or second so-called leader in the world in this technology. So the idea that, spyware is damaging enough, but spyware doesn't kill huge amounts of people. AI-enabled warfare can and does. And, my view is there should be bans on this kind of weaponry. It needs to be pushed by various UN bodies. It needs to be pushed by various states. There needs to be this idea challenge. I feel often as a journalist that there's a lot of what I call boosterism in my profession, the media, of kind of celebrating any kind of new AI tool as somehow an advance for humanity. Now, obviously, AI is going to be part of our lives for better or worse in years to come. It seems now quite inevitable. And in some ways, in some parts of our life, I'm sure AI will be helpful, maybe writing assignments or whatever it may be. But, the idea that somehow AI-enabled warfare becomes the new norm, that it is used almost, and I fear in years to come, it's going to be blamed. It wasn't us, it was the machine. No, 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 no. There needs to be a clear understanding, right? That this is ultimately, and as far as I understand in Gaza in the last 7 months, a machine itself was not making a decision to press the button to bomb a house. It was made by a human, an Israeli. And to me, the way you address that also quite clearly, and obviously the ICC case, which obviously at the moment it's only going after 2 people in Israel, Netanyahu and Gallant, the defense minister. I think there is every reason to hope in the months and years ahead that certain people who are directly involved in AI targeting are also prosecuted. Because if you bring accountability for these kind of crimes, believe me, the reason the US is so opposed to Israel being targeted by the ICC is that they don't want to be targeted themselves for their own crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere, or for that matter, complicity in what Israel's doing. But of course, they were very happy to support it when Putin was charged by the ICC, and I have no problem with Putin being charged there. But it's fine if it's our enemies, but not so much if it's our friends. And holding people to account, the idea of some kind of legal process, and not that I'm idealizing the law has its own faults and problems, but I think there needs to be some kind of pressure and push by using the current investigations that exist and doing more in time to hold some of these Israeli intelligence and military officials to account in a trial for using AI to kill people on a mass scale. I guarantee that would make many states, including Israel, far more cautious in using some of those tools in the future.
That's an incredible insight, Anthony, and I really thank you for your time with us. Well, I'm sure the audience at PIRAF would be loving to hear your insights on this. It's very timely, and of course, it's a developing situation. I'm looking forward to any further projects by yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great to be here.